Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us for this Cheshire and Merseyside Health Protection Avian Flu learning event. We've brought together Cheshire and Merseyside Animal Health and Human Health Protection professional communities as both presenters and audience for this session. I think we've put together a really interesting programme for the next couple of hours. I'm personally looking forward to it, and I hope you'll find it useful and interesting as well. Just before we get going, if I can just do a couple of the usual housekeeping. So the format of the event, we've got two sessions. The first session is why we should be concerned about avian flu. And then the second session is some practical examples of approaches to responding to avian flu. So if I could ask everybody to keep their microphones and cameras off during the session, unless they're speakers, or asking a question in the two question and answer sessions we've got. You can use the chat to pose any questions at any point for anybody during the session, and my colleague Lucy has kindly agreed to monitor that chat and help us to kind of marshal those answers. If we've got a lot of questions that we can't answer, or any questions that we can't answer due to time constraints, we will endeavour to answer those via a kind of FAQ, which we'll send round afterwards. We are recording the meeting as well, and the video will be again made available, as will the slides and any related material. So those will come out afterwards. So they will be published on the CHAMPS website and the YouTube channel. So during the Q&A sessions, you can, again, use the chat or raise your hand to pose questions. I can see someone's already got their hand up, actually. Is that a question already? Sue, is there something you need to pick up now? Okay. So I think that's all the housekeeping. So we'll press on. So I'd like to introduce, first of all, Anjila, Shah and the Tanith partner from the UK Health Security Agency, and they'll provide some insight into the background of the current epidemiology of avian flu. So over to you, Tanith and Anjila. Thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you, everyone. So Tanith and I are doing a double act, so I'll start and then Tanith will take over. I will share my slides in a second, so please bear with me. Can you see?
We can. It's just the PowerPoint window, Angela. So you haven't got it on
slideshow.
On slideshow. Yeah.
Is this okay now?
Yeah, perfect.
So hello everyone, and as Donald said, I'm Angela, and I'm one of the consultants at UK Health Security Agency. So we all know what flu is. And the flu viruses, they are a large group of different viruses, some of which cause infections in humans, many of which cause infections in animals, and some of them almost exclusively cause infection in birds. But I'm saying almost exclusively because they can spread it around. And avian influenza is just that, influenza virus causing infection in birds. It's a highly contagious infection, and there are some types of birds, migratory wild birds, particularly the waterfowl that act as a reservoir for the infection or the influenza virus. And when these birds have the virus in them, it's either in their respiratory tract or in their digestive tract, and if they're not very sick with it, they can transmit it on to other birds and other animals and sometimes even humans across countries and across their migratory paths. So the avian influenza virus, like the human influenza virus, it's an RNA virus, and it's got these proteins on the surface of it, the N's and the H. Sorry, somebody needs to go on mute, if you don't mind. You can hear some background noise there. So the picture here that you're seeing is just like a diagrammatic representation. And on the surface of the virus are these proteins, the hemagglutinin and neuraminidase, which help the virus to attach to cells and then enter the cells and infect cells. The H's and N's, there are many different types of it, and the combinations then result in the subtypes that we see, for example, H5N1 or H7N9. And then these subtypes are further grouped into high pathogenic influenza, avian influenza viruses, and low pathogenic. Now, the high pathogenic and the low pathogenic, this refers to the virulence in birds and not in humans, because if human infections, although they are rare, can be caused either by viruses which are highly pathogenic in birds, but even by viruses which have low pathogenicity in birds. So the problem with avian influenza is that it's very infectious. It causes a lot of disease in birds when there are outbreaks, and that has huge financial impact on farming and businesses, because to control the outbreak, culling is employed even for healthy birds, and that obviously can have devastating effects. Avian influenza not only affects poultry and farm birds, but even wild birds. There's lots of die-off of wild birds. They're victims as well as spreading it around. And then, of course, it's the impact on public health. Although human infections are rare, they have happened, and several subtypes have been associated with human disease. And some of them have caused really significant morbidity and mortality, particularly outside Europe, where some of the avian influenza infections have had a mortality of 40 to 50%. There have been recent cases last year and this year, human infections in Europe, in America, and elsewhere. But luckily, the ones in Europe haven't caused very serious disease so far. So why are we actually worried? If avian influenza is a disease of birds, why are we worried in public health, and especially since it causes very few human infections? Well, we all know that seasonal flu happens every year, and the virus changes a little every year, causing new epidemics. And that's why we need a new vaccine every year. But sometimes a flu virus is able to make a change or a mutation where it becomes very different to the previously circulating strains, and therefore it can infect a large number of people, particularly if it acquires the ability to spread very efficiently amongst humans. We all know what a pandemic is. We are facing one now. And although this is a coronavirus pandemic, the other previous pandemics have been with flu, particularly. Flu A is one of the kind of most likely candidate to become pandemic virus, because the virus is constantly mutating and changing. So it's quite possible for an animal influenza A virus to change in such a way that it can affect humans more easily and transmit from person to person and cause a pandemic. Like I said before, human infections are limited, and so far they've only been in people who've been working on poultry farms or people who've had really direct and close prolonged contacts with infected birds. And that is because the virus hasn't acquired the mutation to spread easily amongst humans. If a mutation does occur that makes the virus circulate more easily, then that would be a game changer. And the more changes the virus has to jump into the humans and mutate, the more likely it is that a dangerous strain might emerge and it could set off the next pandemic. So you can see why it's such a big concern for public health, and why such a lot of work goes into responding to and controlling outbreaks of avian influenza. Again, this data shows you the number of avian influenza incidents, and they were in single digits and very low numbers in the past years. Now, whether there was less avian influenza circulating them, or were we detecting them less? I don't know. I'm sure Allister will be able to tell us more about that. But you can see that the numbers have started to increase and really increase a large increase over the last couple of side. So what does it really mean? What does it mean for public health, and what is the risk assessment? In public health, we use use these 5 headings when we risk assess any situations. What is the spread? Now, we know for certain there's a large increase in avian influenza in birds, and in 2022, there've almost been year-round incidents. Because of the large increase in avian flu in birds, the extent of human exposures has increased. We also know that H5N1, which is highly pathogenic in birds, is the dominant virus for now. There is no widespread mammalian adaptation, and there have been very few cases. And the strain which is circulating here has not caused severe disease in Europe, at least. But there are uncertainties. For example, we don't really do very much screening for people without symptoms. You can't be absolutely certain about transmission in people who are asymptomatic. We also look at how easy it is to intervene to stop a public health problem from happening or spreading. And the tools we have for this are trying to limit exposure, making sure personal protective equipment is being used by people exposed. Exposed people are provided antivirals to stop them from getting and transmitting the infection, and then very close monitoring and assessment of all the exposed people. If any of them become symptomatic, making sure they're swabbed and managed appropriately. And I would say the context has not been the easiest. There are public concerns and attitudes about even influenza can change from time to time. The pressures we work under and the external factors about arranging response, etc., has not always been easy. And I will leave you with this picture just to show you the number of cases that have happened, human cases, this year alone. Some of them quite close to home. And then I'll hand over to Tanith, who will take you through the rest of the presentation. Tanith, over to you.
Thanks, Anjila. Jane, can I just get a quick time check, please, so I know what time I'm working to?
About 13 minutes.
About 13 minutes. Okay, thanks, Jane. So yeah, hi everyone. My name's Tanith Palmer. I am also a consultant in health protection with the Cheshire and Merseyside team. I am going to try and share my screen now. Bear with me. Oh, it's disappeared off my thing. Anjila, I might just get you. Oh no, it's okay. Hang on. Here we go. Right. Right, can I ask what you can see? Can you just see my slide?
Yes, that's
Yes.
good.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, so yeah, so a quick look over the roles and responsibilities when we're responding to avian influenza. So we've obviously got DEFRA, who is the lead government department, and they will look at things like policy. We've got APHA, or the Animal Plant Health Agency, and they are the delivery body, and they will lead on the actual operational activities, so getting in on site, etc. And dealing with kind of catching and culling, or at least leading on that operation. In terms of the human health side, we've got the health protection teams, and we will lead on the public health response alongside DEFRA and APHA. We've got NHS commissioners who are the health service response. Specifically, they are very heavily involved in the antiviral pathways, which we'll look at a little bit more later. The local authorities who work once again on the operational side, but they are really key in kind of working in the area that's affected. So they may look at kind of like comms, they'll look at the restriction that's in place, they will do kind of, they'll go to the affected properties and those in the restricted areas kind of outside of it. And then you've got the national UKHSA team who provide some of that specialist expertise, and comms really come from everywhere, and so it's not just DEFRA, APHA and UKHSA, but obviously the local authority will work on that, and there'll also be kind of local, there'll be internal comms for NHS as well. So when we're responding to an avian influenza kind of situation, we'll run through this kind of usual process. So we'll look at confirming the situation, where it is, who's been involved, and confirming that the results are actually in. So quite often we will get a pre-warning to suggest that there has been an ongoing situation within a farm, and that we are anticipating the results. And then when those results come in, that will obviously confirm it, and we'll identify those people who have been exposed. Generally speaking, we'll be looking at people like farm workers or contractors, vets, APHA staff, members of the public. We'll then risk assess. So that's based on that type of avian influenza that Anjala's already covered, and also the type of exposure, so whether people were wearing PPE, etc. In terms of controlling the situation, we'll look at minimising further exposure, so as few people as possible to be exposed, that they're wearing appropriate PPE. And we will set up either active or passive monitoring, and that is based on well, the individual choice actually, but also the type of avian influenza that we are dealing with and the type of exposure. We will information share, as mentioned before, with the local authority, and arrange antivirals where appropriate. And finally, it would be about managing any of the exposed people who then become unwell. In terms of the final step, it would always be communication, and in fact this would actually take place throughout. It wouldn't just be the end of this process with all of the stakeholders that we ran through before. So in terms of kind of assessing exposure, we can split exposed people into 3 categories. So we've got those who are generally exposed prior to identification of the incident, so farm workers, etc. And it's very unlikely that they're going to be wearing appropriate PPE because they'll have just been going about their ordinary kind of job. And then we've got category B, which is the responders to the incident. So generally speaking, they'll be wearing very appropriate PPE, and sometimes they will get pre-exposure antivirals where it's possible to do that, although admittedly in reality it's very rare that we have all of the information in time to be able to set that up. And then category C, which are our non-occupational exposures. So that might include people like members of the public who inadvertently handle sick and dead birds, which actually happens quite regularly. And then outside of these, you've got people who haven't handled the dead or the diseased birds, or their faeces, or any litter or eggs, and therefore we wouldn't consider them to be at risk. So if there's someone who's seen a dead bird in a park but hasn't been close to it, we wouldn't class them as an exposed person. And we use this kind of assessment of exposure to decide how we then kind of move forward from that. Now, when we're responding to avian influenza outbreaks, we're generally kind of working on a standard or strict approach, and our kind of national UKHSA colleagues will help define this when they send through the results through to us, and they'll define the kind of different levels of response that are required for both birds, so whether there's kind of mass culling that's required, and also humans. So whether we're looking at that active monitoring, so that is that we're contacting people every day, or passive monitoring, whereby we just ask them to let us know if they're unwell. Strict approach is used when any of the following criteria are met. So that will include H5, H7 or H9, where there's been human deaths or serious human illness that's associated with it, or it's a subtype that's previously been associated with person-to-person transmission. And we'll kind of go from there. So human cases of avian influenza. So as Anjila says, this is rare, but it's something that we have to monitor, because where we see human cases of avian influenza, as Anjila said, that means that there could potentially be mutations that would then allow it to pass from human to human easily. So we take it very seriously when we find a potential case. The difficulty with avian influenza is it, as far as we're aware, it kind of presents largely like any other type of influenza. So we're looking at things like high fevers, coughs, shortness of breath, kind of conjunctivitis type symptoms, and then other symptoms such as muscle ache, sore throats, runny noses, which, as you can tell, particularly at this time of the year, lots of people will have that. However, if we know that someone's been exposed and then they get these, any of these symptoms, we do need to take it seriously, and we do need to kind of decide what to do next. So in that particular situation, we would define them as a possible case, and we would ask them to isolate. We would take a swab, and we would get an assessment put in place by someone potentially from the infectious disease unit at the hospital, but certainly a clinical kind of assessment of the person to determine what to do next. If they come back as, we'll immediately start them on a treatment dose. So they may have been on a dose of antivirals already because they've been exposed, but we'll then kind of up that dose to a treatment dose until we get that result back. And then if that then comes back as positive, then we would take it down the high consequence infectious disease pathway alongside the infectious disease unit. So some of the key public health actions that we undertake are around monitoring of exposed individuals. So as I said, that will look like passive or active. Now, Anjila mentioned the people who have been exposed, and I think something that's really key to mention to that, although that number was, I think it was about 1,800, actually what we find is that despite that, a number of the people that we have on monitoring are people who regularly come up. So even though it may only cast as one person, they're actually monitored for a really long period of time, because they might do a job where they're actively going out to collect dead birds, which means they can be on active monitoring for a really, really long period of time. So that can be quite a kind of considerable burden on resource. We ensure that PPE is kind of worn where appropriate, although the responding agencies will obviously take care of their kind of own PPE. Where it is classed as a strict approach, and just as reference, last winter when we were dealing with it, all of our situations in Cheshire and Merseyside were under the strict approach, which meant that everyone required offering of antivirals, providing it was within 10 days. So we do have to offer those antivirals kind of within that kind of like period of time. And then we will investigate and manage any possible cases, which I've just run through, and kind of work with on communication with people. So there are a number of challenges at the moment. I think the first is around the large burden of incidents, particularly over the past 12 to 18 months. There's been a huge number of incidents, and it places a huge burden not just on us, but also on the local authority, the NHS, APHA, etc., just to kind of respond to this. It can be really difficult to obtain timely and complete lists of exposed people. So what we find is with the exposed people, they're quite often part of independent contracts. They tend to be a very mobile group. We quite often find that they're not registered locally or with a GP. There may be things like language barriers, which although we can manage language barriers when we know that they are there, quite often we won't know that they're there or what language someone may speak until we kind of speak to them directly, which makes it very difficult to ensure that we are kind of appropriately communicating the risks and asking around antivirals. I think one of the other issues is that the way that the labs work is it means that quite often, as my NHS and local authority colleagues will attest to, is we don't get notification of this until a Friday. It's quite often a Friday, Thursday evening, Friday morning, which then makes kind of trying to organise antivirals on site, which is generally the most effective way, because people do disperse very quickly afterwards when we're looking at kind of contractors. Trying to do that can be really, really difficult. So we have been kind of working on that antiviral pathway, but it does remain a challenge. And then in terms of clinical assessment, technically swabs for people should be done by a clinical member of staff. But recently we've had to get people to do their own swabs, which is not ideal, because obviously we need to ensure that people are doing swabs effectively. But having a system in place to enable us to do that can be incredibly challenging on an already stretched kind of health system. In terms of things that we need to look at moving forward, it's around kind of trying to get all of these arrangements in place so we can just like press a go button and it's incredibly rapid. We need kind of good and timely communication between organisations, which is generally kind of pretty effective at the moment. But due to the nature of how quickly these things move, it can mean that there are difficulty, particularly with getting details around exposed people, as I mentioned previously. We need effective systems in place to allow follow-up of anyone who has been exposed. That antiviral pathway, which I've already mentioned, and the kind of improvement of that swabbing and treatment clinical assessment of human cases. All of this is kind of currently under discussion between the various different stakeholders who are involved, and we'll kind of continue to move forward with that. And I think that there'll probably be just some discussions about that later on. So just in summary, I think that you've seen from Anjila, there's been an increasing number of avian influenza incidents. Last winter was particularly challenging. Although the risk of human cases currently is pretty low, the severity of infection really is high, which is the reason why we take this seriously, and we are concerned about that risk of mutation, which will allow it to pass from human to human. There are challenges that remain, as I've covered, kind of both in resource and time, antiviral provision and follow-up and swabbing and treatment of exposed people. And realistically, the only way we're going to be able to do this is kind of by multi-stakeholder collaboration across the system. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Tanith. Really helpful. So if I can now hand over to Allister Compton from the APHA. Thanks,
Apologies,
Allister.
Donald, you had asked me to do that. Sorry about that.
Not a problem at all, Tanith.
Thanks, Donald.
Thanks very much, Tanith and Anjila. That's really useful. I'm trying not to. I've tried not to duplicate in my presentation, but there are one or two bits of crossover that you'll appreciate. So yes, I'm the Resilience and Technical Advisor for England for the Animal and Plant Health Agency. There are one or two more of us, but my specialism is in cleansing and disinfection of premises, and I'm the national lead for the wild bird survey and the positive findings that we have in that, and the follow-up and the stakeholder engagement, which can be quite involved. The Animal and Plant Health Agency is a core DEFRA agency, and yes, we have a policy side which sets what we should do, and then the APHA side of it does the delivery. We work in collaboration with various operational partners, particularly local authorities, because they handle the enforcement of the legislation that we're working under. We work with local resilience forums and emergency planners in terms of response in various things. Some diseases that we get involved in have got a major input for local authorities. Some things like anthrax and rabies, for example, that would be a high degree of close involvement. And of course, with avian influenza and one or two other zoonotic diseases, we would work closely and do work closely with UKHSA and health protection teams in the regions. And then on top of that, of course, we have a lot of liaison with industry. There's some large farming type organisations, National Farmers Union, British Poultry Council, British Free Range Egg Producers Association, and things like that. So we're fairly hands-on with all of the animal health needs of the country. So as has been discussed, this is a much overused word this year, unprecedented indeed. The AI outbreak of 21-22. We are in one outbreak at the moment, which is completely unusual. we normally have a seasonal avian influenza incidents across the country. Sometimes it is just in wild birds, and sometimes it also gets into the kept poultry population. And over the years, we've had, burbling along a few cases. Last year, we had 26 cases of avian influenza in kept poultry. And this year, we are now up to 297 cases in domestic kept poultry. That's both backyard flocks and big, large commercial flocks as well, as of just a couple of days ago. And you can see that dramatic rise at the end of the graph there. Particularly, you can see obviously an exponential rise in deaths and of the ones that we've disposed of, because when we move on to a farm, we dispose of all those birds, as has been shown already, by going off to a rendering plant in most cases. And they are around the country. And yes, you do have one in Cheshire, so you're well aware of what happens there. So again, looking at the over the years, and we can see now, once you get into this particular outbreak, starting back in October 21, we had a bit of a peak, as we'd have expected, in the winter last year, brought about by the wild bird ingress at that time. And then we thought that it would probably die out, as it normally does, in April. But it didn't quite die out, and it just trickled on, and we'll look at why in a minute or two. And then again, we fully expected in the summer, with all of that hot weather, that we would have eradicated avian influenza. It is what normally happens, and it didn't. And then suddenly, August, September, we had this enormous peak. In 1 week alone, we had over 30 outbreaks in kept poultry. Fortunately, as you can see, it's tailed off in the last couple of weeks, which is extremely encouraging. But we are still getting a few, and some quite large poultry units going down. Obviously, I'm talking here about kept poultry as opposed to wild birds. Wild birds findings have similarly followed that curve through the year, which we'll talk about. On a worldwide situation, these are sort of the situation in May. You can see that while we are normally free of AI by late spring, early summer, in May, the whole of Europe was pretty badly affected, but not just Europe. North America was severely affected. The green areas on this map are actually countries that are officially free or absent of avian influenza. There's 1 or 2 sporadic cases, but not enough to say that it was prevalent. And the red ones are the ones where there is widespread avian influenza. And it has persisted across the whole of the northern hemisphere through this year. There's a little bit in the south as well, as you can see down in South Africa and Southwest Africa, and of course over in the Far East, China and some of the Asian countries. So in our immediate neighbours, we think we've got a bad case of avian influenza, a bad outbreak. We pale into insignificance against the Netherlands and France and the Low Countries, Denmark. This last season has been devastating in those countries, particularly for kept poultry. And so our close neighbours have been badly hit. The French game bird industry was totally wiped out this year. Very, very few birds were available for the game bird industry to import into the UK. Which is probably not a bad thing, because pheasants in particular are highly susceptible. And we've had many, many cases of birds that were released for shooting with very high mortality, up to 50% of the population that they release. And if you release 10,000 birds into a large estate and the gamekeepers are finding 5,000 dead, you can imagine the financial consequences of that. So we do run a survey, which is a dip check really as to what is going on in terms of the genotypes of avian influenza that's coming into the country. It comes in on wild birds in the main, and we're part of the international disease monitoring to detect AI, and we collaborate with the World Animal Health organizations to share that data and understand which strains are coming in. it does depend entirely on the public reporting sightings, and often sometimes local authorities and landowners. And the criteria that we use it changes depending on what our virologists are looking for in terms of sensitivity. And at the moment, it's 1 bird of prey, 3 waterfowl, or 5 of any other species would trigger a collection by one contractor who would go and collect a sample. Up to 5 birds would be collected and sent to our laboratory, and we would test up to 3 of those 5. And we test once a week. This is not a diagnostic service for anything other than our international disease monitoring. But the spin-off from that is, because it's a zoonosis, we are duty bound to inform Colindale, and we also advise the regional HPT in confirmation when we get the results. And they do come out. If we test on a Wednesday, the results are collated and sense checked and quality assured, and they normally come out on a Friday. This is completely different to notifiable disease in kept poultry, where we respond within half an hour of receiving a call to investigate disease on a poultry farm, for example, and we will go that same day, either negate the disease or take samples that same day. The samples are then couriered immediately to our World Reference Laboratory at Weybridge and tested overnight or first thing in the morning. And those results are always available within 24 hours. And again, that will be notified to you as soon as they're available during the week. Unfortunately, it is a very strange thing about the way that diseases are found on farms and reported, that we do get a peak towards the end of the week. And that's a sociological thing rather than than the actual disease itself. It's just that they delay informing us until towards the end of the week when they realise that the weekend is coming up. But what changed in 2022? There was a vast increase in samples collected from the wild. And we had this summer carryover, which we'd never had before. And we were facing a lot of reports of public areas with mass die-offs of birds. Back in the autumn of 2021, we had a lot of birds dying in the Wirral. The barnacle geese, particularly there were thousands of them on the beaches. This was unusual to have such a large die-off. But then what tended to happen was that because of the wild birds, we then had more infection in kept poultry and a high number of outbreaks. And there wasn't a lot of information in the public domain about this. And in August, we published a new mitigation strategy document to try and give people information, including responsible bodies like UKHSA and local authorities as to what to do with it. So what actually happens is in the autumn, we get the wild birds coming in, and as a result of that, we end up getting outbreaks in kept poultry. This is quite normal, and that's the model that we understood. So back in the autumn, this is what happened. It came into the east coast, it jumped over the Pennines into the northwest, and you had a fair incidence in the autumn last year, and then it spread southwards, all spread by wild birds. There was no other epidemiological explanation apart from a little cluster in Lincolnshire where we believed there was some transfer between farms due to poor biosecurity. And then in the summer, the wild birds decided to go back, as they always do, to Scandinavia and northern Russia. But it appears that they stopped off for a final feed before going across the North Sea on the east coast of Scotland and Northumberland. And the seabirds had started breeding, and that developed into a massive disease outbreak in wild birds on the east coast up into Scotland. And within about 3 or 4 weeks, that disease had spread amongst the seabirds around the whole of the east and south coast of the United Kingdom. And then we found that there were predators feeding on the dead bird carcasses in those breeding grounds. And that was fine until the breeding season ended and the birds left. And then what happened was that the seagulls in the main started to forage inland in the late summer and autumn, and they brought the disease back into the interior of the country again. So we started off with the southwest getting quite badly hit, and East Anglia getting badly hit, one or two other places. And now, as we are now, we've had a very, very serious situation in East Anglia, and it's been working its way up north into East Yorkshire, across to your side of the country, and up into Aberdeen area in Scotland. As a result of that, we imposed a housing order, and in the southwest and East Anglia, then in England, and now in Wales as well, to try and keep kept poultry safe. We published this mitigation strategy, which is accessed on gov.uk, which gives advice to people as to what they should be doing with wild birds and kept birds too. And the question that we're always asked is that, how long is it going to last? When's it safe? Well, there's quite a lot of work being done in the public domain. This table was published by the European Food Safety Authority based on lots of research done by our own reference laboratory and other international partners. And the bits that we're really interested in are the viruses, the virus elements of this, and how long does it last in the environment? Because everybody's always asking me when it's safe. Well, basically, if you look at the virus timelines there in different situations, the bits that we're probably interested in feces at 5 degrees, possibly lasting up to 50 days. But obviously, as the temperature goes up on the left-hand side there, as soon as you get above 20 degrees, it drops radically back to 7 days, 10 days normal, and at higher, with the summer temperatures that we had this year, it would have eradicated in feces within a couple of days. Water, in the middle of the chart there, we've got a lot of samples of water, so there's a lot of data on water. And the latest figure we had at 17 degrees was about 70 days. On the right, you'll see that in feathers at 4 degrees, we've got viable virus remaining at just under 250 days. But what I would say is that's not on the surface of the feather, that's actually inside the feather. It's not, unless you're going to eating feathers, you're not going to catch avian influenza from just handling a feather after all those days. But in the early days, feathers do carry mucus secretions because the birds preen themselves, and so they would have infectious virus on them. Just want to give you a quick run through on the risk factors and the exposure and the type of exposure which you see. This is a geese farm up in Norfolk, 70 or 80 acres of geese. Talked about feathers. Just look at the amount of feathers that these geese molt. And if it's an infected premises, then those feathers will have live virus in them for quite a long time. But again, it's not in the summer weather that we had this year, but through the winter, it could last for some time. So these geese live in close proximity. Admittedly, they're free range and very high welfare. But unfortunately, they caught avian influenza and it passed very rapidly, and they had very serious symptoms and were dying very quickly. It's highly pathogenistic, and this is unusual because waterfowl normally hide the disease, but this H5N1 that we've got this year is affecting waterfowl much more seriously than we've ever seen before. What we do is we euthanize these birds in argon CO2 mixture. We put them in modules, which are standard poultry modules, and then they get put into the chambers and they die within about 4 to 10 minutes. This is the sort of exposure that catchers will get, and these are the contracted catchers that go and collect the birds to put them in the modules. And I particularly put that in there because, as you can see, 2 of those people are wearing their PPE probably correctly. The one in the middle has already let his mask slip down and his goggles are on his forehead, and that's clearly not acceptable. But these are the sort of people that we're dealing with. And so that when you do your follow-ups, checks on, I mean, we do a lot of work of making people comply. So there's the modules going into the chambers, and at the end we disinfect the birds before they get sent off for rendering. Bad picture, that's taken through a plastic bag on my phone because everything that we take onto the IPs has to be protected. And then they go away. We also have to do sampling in the field often. So here's a team of our staff sampling birds for epidemiological purposes. And as you can see, our own staff are fully protected, wearing all the recommended PPE and handle that correctly. We also have to think about backyard flocks and smallholders, very much more difficult to enforce biosecurity with these people. This was one that we culled out back in the summer, and this lady had about 200 birds spread over this large orchard, and they were free roaming really, even though that it was in a control order and they shouldn't have been out at all. This is much more normal poultry houses, controlled environment situations. It's much more easier to deal with. Once we've closed the gate on these places, there's no opportunity for spread. And there you can see we have there a clean and dirty line with the red tape, lots of disinfectant around, our staff on board, all of their kit hidden away in polythene bags if necessary, wearing either full face respirators or powered hoods, and twin overalls, double gloves, and everything they would need to stay safe. After the event, after the birds have gone, we hand the farm back to the farmer, and they have to clean these out to within an inch of their lives, and that can take a couple of months or more to get that done correctly. And eventually we expect to see a completely clean site ready for restocking. So that's the end of that. Thank you very much. I can hand back to Donald, and I think we can have some questions.
Thank you very much, Alistair. That was absolutely fascinating, and thanks to Tanith and Anjila as well. So yeah, we've now got time for some questions. I've got a couple of questions, so I'm going to take chair's prerogative and ask mine first. We've got a number of questions in the chat which are relating to antiviral pathways in care homes, which I'm going to ask that we take outside of this meeting so that we can focus on the avian antiviral and other response. So first, an observation that you said that the Friday notifications, Alistair, are a sociological function. I don't think they are. I think that viruses know what day of the week it is, because it's not particular to avian influenza. They all seem to pop up on Friday afternoon. You mentioned the Netherlands and France being so badly hit, and I wondered if you had any idea as to why that was so different. Is it density of birds or practices so different?
Very much the migratory patterns. They get it about a month before we do normally. They stop off there. A lot of it is down to the different species of birds, and they're used to going to the same feeding areas and breeding areas, and that's why they get it first. France particularly have got a lot of marshy areas, particularly on the west coast, down the Camargue and what have you. And that's an absolutely it's a haven for wildfowl. But yes, it's just I mean, we like a bit like everything else, you know, we've still got the North Sea and the Channel keeping us a little bit separate. But these birds, they do enormous distances. The Northern Flyway is just incredible. Birds are doing sort of 10,000-mile trips.
Thank you. That's really helpful. Just another point of clarification. I wonder if either Tanith or Anjila could. Alistair mentioned Colindale. Could you just tell us briefly what the Colindale facility is? Sorry, you're on mute, Anjila.
I think you mean that there's a reference lab at Colindale, and there's a whole team that deals with national avian influenza. So that's I think what Alistair means, that Colindale is just the site where they are.
Yeah, specialist facility. Thank you very much. So I can see a question from Elspeth, I think for Alistair. Do we know why the October peak has reduced? Was it the impact of stricter control measures?
I'd like to think yes, but in reality, what happened was there was an ingress of wild birds, particularly into East Anglia, which is where all these were at the time. And we believe it was herring gulls and black-headed gulls that brought it inland. And it infected a lot of turkey units and 1 or 2 free-range units. And frankly, we killed them all out. So, you know, there wasn't the number of units available to be infected after we'd taken, 30 or 40 of them out. So that's one reason. But I think also the birds moved further inland and they didn't find more birds where they moved to. So they kind of stopped off. They came in off the coast. They stopped into Norfolk and Suffolk and then went further west where there wasn't such a high density of poultry. So I think that is also it. But unfortunately, that's bits of epidemiology we just haven't got sufficient data. We work very closely with Natural England and the British Trust for Ornithology, and we've got lots of theories, but not enough data to really help us on that.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. So I can see another question from the chat from David. In terms of risk, are port areas targeted for comms and survey work? Many warehouses and shipside terminals are quite well covered with birds, feathers and feces.
We had a lot of reports from Kent and Dover. Again, it was mostly seabirds down there. So we did have a lot of samples from these. Towards late summer, I'm afraid we stopped taking any more samples of seabirds because we weren't learning any more information. Because again, we want information for our survey, which was trying to see what strain is coming in. Has there been any development in the strain? We've had H5N1 all this season. Previous year it was H5N8. We've had H5N5 in the past as well. So we're on the lookout for any changes in the pattern of the disease coming around the international scene. So we weren't learning any more from the seabirds, so we stopped collecting them.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. Just to mention as well, the questions are coming in the chat, but you can also please put your hand up if you want to ask a question in person. I know sometimes chat facility doesn't necessarily work for everybody. So I think the next question is from Isabel. Are warmer autumns and winters likely to be having an impact on a survival of the virus in the environment? So I think, I'm afraid, Allister, this is another one for you.
Actually, warmth is really good. The warmer, the shorter the virus survival in the environment. We don't believe there's been a very big carryover in the environment anyway. The danger is live birds and their secretions and their feces. Even a dead bird carcass doesn't pose, such a big risk. It's not respiring. It's not producing any more live virus. What it's got. It's not increasing the risk at all. In fact, we don't recommend collecting wild bird carcasses unless they're causing a public nuisance. Because all you're doing is exposing yourself to possibly touching them, and you're not going to have any very little effect on the spread of disease. The scientists have decided that really, you're not going to remove sufficient carcasses to have any major impact in terms of stopping spread of disease. The only issue with dead bird carcasses really is predation. We do have a number of birds of prey that we find in the survey, and they're obviously been predating on infected carcasses. And just as an aside to that, there's some anecdotal evidence of foxes in Kent and Sussex dying, possibly having been fed on avian influenza infected birds. And we have had a red fox in our own lab tested, and one or two other things. Seals, for example, we've had positive seals. And internationally, there is work being done on mammals that have been infected due to mostly by predation.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to skip a question and come back to it just to give Allister a break, because there is another question that I think is for Allister, but I can see one here that relates to from Catherine regarding clinical assessment with regard to swabbing and treatment for those contractors involved in the removal and destruction of birds. Our urgent treatment centre have supported prophylaxis for AVs. Would they be required to send swabs? And I wonder if Tanith or Anjila could speak to that one.
So just to state that clinical assessments only required where someone's symptomatic, so it wouldn't be required just for anyone, so it's where we have someone who's been exposed, we're monitoring them, and then they develop those kind of very generic flu-like symptoms. The people who are providing prophylaxis are not handling the birds directly anyway. I'm presuming that they'll just be providing kind of prophylaxis to people who have been exposed. So that stage. Now, if we had someone who had been handling birds and developed symptoms, and then we determined that actually they did in fact have, they had actually contracted avian influenza, then we would then kind of go through the various stages that are required for that. But no, they wouldn't need a kind of clinical assessment, etc. at that stage. And I think Anjila kind of wants to add in there.
Sorry, thanks, Tanith. I just wanted to add there, like Tanith said, we'll follow up people, and if somebody develops those symptoms, which are very broad and very vague, and they're not ill enough to go into hospital, so, you know, we're not activating the HCID pathway, and they need to be swabbed in the community, it would be really great to have a service in the community that can actually swab people before they go into hospital, perhaps go into their homes and swab them. The swabs are arranged by a public health lab. So, you know, we'd still have the same swabs. And at the moment we courier it to the person's house and they swab themselves. The labs are not happy with this at all. So really there needs to be somebody to swab the ones that we find need swabbing in the community while they're still well.
Okay, thank you. So that's possibly something for us to consider at the end of the session today about possible further action, is exploring mechanisms for swabbing, community mechanisms. I'm going to bring this Q&A to an end shortly. I'm just going to give one more question for Allister, I think, because I think it's an interesting question to me anyway, as someone who spends a lot of time, or as much time as I can, in the countryside. What kind of live wild bird behaviour could be an indicator of infection? And I think apart from being dead.
Yeah, well, that's certainly the main thing. No, waterfowl particularly, you'll see them circling on the lakes and ponds and rivers. They have neurological symptoms, which basically is incoordination, and you'll find the head will swell. They will have torticollosis of the neck, which is very common. There'll be tremors, and you'll see them labouring for breath. This is primarily a respiratory disease, very much a respiratory disease, but in the wildfowl at the moment, we are seeing massive internal organ breakdowns and hemorrhage, and it's very distressing to see. You'll find that particularly in geese and ducks, that you'll get hemorrhaging in the neck and head, and they'll be bleeding from the eyes.
Quite distressing, like you say. Thanks for that, Allister. I'm going to bring the questions to a close. I'm aware that we've got an unanswered one from Charlotte. We'll maybe try and address that one either outside of the meeting or later on. I believe now we have a scheduled screen break, which is all very public healthy. So I think 5 minutes, Jane, is that right?
Yes, 5 minutes, Donald.
So if we could reconvene at say 11:05, that would be great. Thanks, everybody. Okay, welcome back, everybody. I think we'll make a start again. It's just gone 5 past, and it looks like we've got most people still on the call, which is great. So I've just realised I didn't introduce myself. So my name's Donald Reid. I'm a consultant in public health with Cheshire West and Chester Local Authority, where as previous speakers have said, we had a number of avian flu incidents recently, and for the second part of this session we're going to draw on some of that experience with some of my local colleagues to talk about the management of those incidents, and then following that we will have another Q&A session. So assuming that Katie has rejoined the call, can I introduce Katie Mills from Cheshire and Merseyside ICB, who's going to talk us through the antiviral pathway that's been developed for avian influenza in Cheshire West, or Cheshire as a whole. Thanks, Katie.
Thanks, Donald. So my name's Katie Mills. I'm Head of Quality at Cheshire East and Cheshire West Place. So I'm going to just talk to you this morning about the avian flu antiviral response for Cheshire as a health system. So next slide, please. So just a little bit of history. Obviously, you saw from the previous slides and speakers that we had a huge spike in avian flu last winter. And although it's UKHSA's responsibility to identify people that have been exposed and then do the risk assessment as to whether they require antivirals, the actual prescribing of the antivirals falls to the NHS and the CCG as it was last year. I can just see my colleague Helen's joined us for the call, which is fantastic. So we'll be doing a double act on these slides. So the history essentially is that Antivirals is not actually a commissioned service within primary care, so GP practices don't have a responsibility to do this work. And as Tanith and Anjila mentioned earlier, often the information about an outbreak comes through on a Friday, and it needs a really rapid response to it. So we were reliant on a small number of GPs that were happy to do this additional work for us, and they would attend the farms generally over the weekend when the cullers and the catchers were on the farms, and they would do the assessments for each of the individuals that had been exposed and identified by UKHSA, and then do the prescribing of the antivirals there and then. So this obviously had a number of issues to it. The first being that whilst they were on site, they didn't have access to the medical records, and a number of the people that they were doing the assessments on were not residents in Cheshire, so they didn't even, through sort of Cheshire shared care records, they wouldn't be able to get access to their records. There is language barriers, so they were often relying on Google Translate to be able to communicate with the people they were doing the assessments on. There were very transient populations, so as soon as they'd finished the work on that farm, there would be sort of a large group of catchers and cullers that would then move on to the next farm. So there was a very finite window that they would be able to see them. And obviously there was a delay between knowing there'd been an outbreak and UKHSA being able to complete the contact tracing. We did have occasions where antivirals were declined, and that was because these individuals this is their livelihood, and they would be going from farm to farm. So this was exposure that they were often that they were used to, and obviously because they should be wearing the full PPE if they were the catchers and cullers, they didn't feel that exposure risk was as high. And then a little bit of sort of pushback that obviously as a health system that we felt that there was an occupational health responsibility for these individuals because this was within their normal working day. So next slide, please. And I'll hand over to Helen for this one.
Hello, everybody. I'm Helen Thornley-Jones, and I work with Katie Mills. I'm sorry I'm late joining the call. So here's our avian flu outbreak prophylaxis pathway. I know it's very small on the screen, but we can share that and we can share it as PDF if it's required. Katie's mentioned some of the issues we were having in undertaking the response, so we decided to change our approach. We already had a local team who were supporting our COVID and flu programs, and they work 7 days, and they've got both prescribers and vaccinators, and together with the expertise in dealing with hard to reach populations and language barriers. They even have Polish and Arabic speakers on the team, so that was really appropriate for this response. So in hours, the UKHSA contact the urgent care team, which was my team, to say there's an outbreak and potentially require a response. It's not always required. So we put our outbreak team on standby to respond. UKHSA then have to confirm that it is an avian flu outbreak, and they contact trace the exposed individuals and offer them the antivirals. And then they compile a list of the people who have been offered who actually want to receive that and require that response. UKHSA then contact our hospital pharmacy who hold a stock of the antiviral for this purpose. And then within 48 hours, our response team will pick up or courier the antivirals to the outbreak location. They will then meet with the exposed individuals to prescribe and to provide the antivirals. They physically hand them over to the exposed individuals, and they will also advise what follow-up is required. All the information is recorded and sent back to UKHSA, who at this time informed the exposed individuals registered GP. Then that's all that's left to do is to return any excess stock to the store at the acute trust and confirm to UKHSA the remaining stock levels we have. There is a lot of support to the outbreak team throughout the process, and on the right of the screen you can see all the people that are involved, and all the contacts are available for the team throughout the time. Next slide.
Thanks, Helen. So there's a number of challenges to this process, although obviously the original process that we used last year had a number of single points of failure, which is why we've implemented a more robust service. We do still have a number of challenges that are outstanding. So the first of those challenges is that it's not very clear exactly what the formal agreement is for the NHS responsibilities for avian flu antiviral prescribing. So that's something that we're looking for clarity on. As I mentioned before, because of the occupational health responsibilities, there is we have got a little bit of pushback in terms of whose responsibility it is for prescribing antivirals when this is within the catcher and colours occupational health remit. Thirdly, there's the funding for the task. It's obviously not in the baseline for our commissioning services, and as Cheshire in a Cheshire and Merseyside system, we're disproportionately affected because of the rural easier for me to say, because we're in a rural area and the number of farms that we've got in Cheshire. The commission service that we have implemented that Helen talked us through before is under a temporary contract until March 2023, so it will still require formal commissioning at that point. We also have a risk around the actual antiviral stock at the moment. UKHSA leave a stock of antivirals at the Countess of Chester pharmacy, which makes it really simple for us to disseminate out to wherever the farms and the outbreaks are. And there is discussions about that being withdrawn from UKHSA's responsibility and handed over to the NHS as a responsibility. And again, this obviously affects us as a rural area more than it would do other areas. Next slide, please.
Okay, so as Katie said, we think of the two models we've got so far. The outbreak team is far more robust, but as COVID reduces, we stand to lose this team in April 2023. So we're looking for funding to retain a shared specialist team who could respond to any sort of outbreak. This could be the avian flu, the flu, COVID, or something that new that comes along. So this team already responds to Liverpool for Mpox, and we're also working with them to protect our refugee and asylum seekers with a variety of vaccinations at our registered locations. So there's lots of potential for a joint shared team across Cheshire and Merseyside. Again, as Katie said, we've got an issue with the a potential issue of UKHSA not supplying the antivirals, because there is potentially some waste from out-of-date antivirals sitting at the trust. But as the exposed individuals are not from a local population, it's probably not appropriate for one area to bear the cost. But we are willing to host the provision within our outbreak team who have that facility. We're also working out how we can electronically prescribe the medication, and we do have the potential to inform the GPs directly, which would be a more efficient process and save UKHSA some time. So that's what we'd like to do going forward with the support of everybody. Are there any questions?
I think we're going to do the next Q&A after the next session, actually, Helen. So
Sorry.
I think that's all right. We're handing over at this point to Nikki and Donald from the local authority so that they can talk us through the avian flu response from a local authority perspective.
Thanks, Katie and Helen. Bit of false advertising there. It's all Nikki, it's not me, but I'm sure I'll find something to say. Thanks, Nikki.
Okay, hi. Do the next slide. That's just a title slide. So I'm Nikki Rose. I'm the operational lead for animal health at Cheshire West and Chester. Why am I here? Probably because we had 5 outbreaks between November and January in last winter, and 2 outbreaks that impinged upon our area but were actually dealt with by Cheshire East. So what we've found is that when it comes to dealing with outbreaks that span local authority areas, it's easier if somebody takes control. So when there's been a little bit of Cheshire East in one of our outbreaks, we've dealt with it, and maybe they've sent us an officer, and the other way when Cheshire East have had an outbreak and it's just come over into our area a little bit, they coordinate the whole response for us and we'll provide them with support. When I talk about what we do, this is just a brief outline of how we've dealt with the outbreaks. It's not the best way. There might be better ways. It's what works for us. It's our way. So we can see that, as Allister showed you, this is the current situation. Sorry, the next slide, please. This is the current situation as of Monday as to outbreaks. There's a prevention zone nationally with mandatory housing in Wales and England, but not in Scotland. Then the other circles show the surveillance zones and the protection zones around infected premises. I'd just like to say that of all the letters in the alphabet, could we not have had the prevention zones using a different letter so that the abbreviations weren't the same for the prevention and the protection zone? Next slide, please. So the actors who are playing when we get a disease outbreak within the area are DEFRA, whose responsibility is to maintain the global trade for the food industry and tourism, and to make sure that the disease doesn't spread. There's awful strain put on farming communities, and there's potential for significant animal welfare issues. What we're trying to do is to stop the spread of disease and to lift any restrictions that have come in around premises. APHA are in charge of delivering the government response to a disease outbreak. They're in charge of doing cleansing and disinfecting at the infected premises, the IP, and they overlook the surveillance and clinical inspections. The local authority and the local authority animal health functions, we are there to actually enforce the rules that have been put in when a declaration is made around an infected premises, and we're assisted by, because notifiable animal diseases are high risk under the Civil Contingencies Act, so that your emergency planning will get involved with all that. I've been binge watching The Handmaid's Tale, and I like to think that DEFRA is the commander, the APHA is the commander's wives, and we're the handmaids. We are just the handmaids of APHA. Next slide, please. So this I've stolen from an APHA Stop the Spread webinar, which is what happens for them. We don't get involved until we've at the laboratory sampling point. We don't attend the infected premises. That's not our role at all. Next slide, please. Our role in the animal health function is essentially we're playing hunt the chicken. When I say chicken, I mean any captive bird. So we need to record all the captive birds, all the susceptible mammals that are within the area where the surveillance zones have been declared. We've got forms to fill in dependent on the types of premises we find the birds on, but it is not our job to get in contact with the birds. And one of the main things about this is you do not want to be going into contact with a bird that might be ill and then go into another premise that's got birds and taking the disease with you. We are there just to collect information. Next slide, please. So our timeline is that we get notification that samples taken and a disease in poultry report number is assigned. So our last disease poultry report that was 2022-388, which gives you some idea of how many samples are being taken by APHA. As soon as I get notification, I use a free online mapping tool and draw an approximately 3 kilometre zone around a postcode, so that if I've got highly pathogenic avian flu, I know the approximate area I'm looking at. It's not accurate, it's not 100%, it will shift a bit. Postcodes aren't always reliable as to the actual point of the premises, but it gives me an idea how rural the area is, how many addresses that I'm going to have to get in touch with in order to fulfill my responsibilities. We normally get an interim result within 24 hours. If it's negative, I don't think there's much record of false negatives. It's highly unlikely once you've had an interim negative that it's going to turn positive. You might be lucky and get a false positive, so that by the time they isolate the genotype, they find out that you don't actually need to take any action. Once you have got a positive result, the genotype will be within 3 to 7 days, and then you'll know exactly what you're doing. Next slide, please. So when you get a positive result, you're then given an AIV number. So for our last outbreak where we had to take major action was DPR 2022-18, which became AIV 2022-08. It's important that you know these numbers because APHA are dealing with such a vast quantity of incoming reports that they don't know the areas. They won't deal with it as the Tarpley breakout or the Helsby breakout. They need to know the AIV numbers that you're dealing with. They'll send you out mapping. You need to establish an operating base. You need to find some volunteers because you've got a lot of doors that you're going to be knocking on. You need to make sure you know your approach. You need to carry out your surveillance, and you need to report that surveillance to APHA in a meaningful way in order that they can report it back up to DEFRA to get the zones removed. When we're looking at volunteers, we start off with our animal health team, then we spread it out to the wider reg services team, then we spread it out to the wider council, and we've also, in highly populated areas, previously used the police and the fire and rescue service. We in one of our outbreaks, we got calls into the council on our rogue trader line saying that there were fake fire and rescue people knocking on the doors and asking what dogs and other pets they'd got on the premises, and residents were concerned that they were rogue traders looking to steal valuable dogs. We did tell them that that wasn't the case and they were assisting us. Next slide, please. There's just some acronyms. Diseases in poultry report. You'll be reporting to an APHA FOB, and that's a forward operating base. For the first 12 months, I thought it was a field operating base. You will be attending lots of meetings that you don't know what the acronyms mean. You just attend them. So we've got the CMART, which is the internal emergency response team. We've got the TCG, which is the tactical coordinating group. So that's the internal team plus people like the fire and police. And they also need to be informed early on when you have got an infected premises, just in case their officers have to attend an event at that location. You don't want their officers or their vehicles spreading disease from the infected premises, so they just need to be put on standby for that. The FOB bird table you will also be asked to attend, which is the APHA, what they call the battle rhythm, and those occur at 9 o'clock on every day, or on a weekly basis, depending on how many outbreaks there are. I think at the moment they are happening Monday to Friday, but not at weekends. You attend as a partner, and I would advise knowing the protocol before you attend those meetings. Do not do what I do. And at the first one I attended, I said hello to everybody, but you don't speak unless you are asked to speak. There's no room for friendliness in those meetings. It's to keep it down. They're dealing with hundreds of cases and they just want an update across the country. Next slide, please. Okay, so when you get your mapping from the APHA, this is what your zones look like. You can see that the red circle is a restricted zone within 1 kilometre of the infected premise. You are interested in anything that falls within the blue circle, which is your 3 kilometre protection zone within a high pathogenic outbreak. Your job is to make sure you've made contact with every premises within that blue circle to find out whether or not they've got birds on the premises. You don't have to go to those premises that the APHA already know have birds on them, and they will send you a list of those premises to avoid duplication of visits. You don't need to consult the poultry register because you don't need to know what's on there. APHA know what's on there. Your job is to find the chickens that aren't registered anywhere. Next slide, please. As you can see, this is just one of the squares on that group, though. So those squares are 1 kilometre by 1 kilometre, and they're called the tiles, and they have to. When you're returning the information, you're returning the information by tile. Some of them will be highly populated. This one isn't. You'll also go line blind. So on this tile, you only have to do the left-hand section within the blue circle. All those other properties just outside are not required to be visited. We, as a matter of course, will visit a farm that's very near the blue line just to check what's going on there. Next slide, please. This is a highly populated tile. So this was, as it says, AIV 2022-08. This was a highly populated tile. In the first outbreaks, we had to visit every single address. We had to door knock every single address and prove that we'd done it. So it was difficult. That's why we needed to call in the police and the fire as well, because we just couldn't handle this volume of visits. But things have evolved now, and we are allowed to do a hybrid approach. So we would now mail shot all these addresses rather than do an actual door knock on them. You have to get that agreed with APHA. It's used doing the surveillance for them, but you have to follow their rules. So where it's highly residential like this, and there's no water courses, there's no obvious higher risk things, you would be able to do a mail shot. Next slide, please. And when you're outdoor knocking, this is what you have to return. So you have to return to say exactly where you went, exactly what you found there. And one of the evolutions is this form used to be filled in for every single address you knocked on. So even if you'd knocked on 100 doors and there was no birds in there whatsoever and no susceptible mammals, then you had to record it on the spreadsheet like this. Now you only have to fill in those where something's been found or they're not in, and you've left a letter to say you've been, but you have to confirm that every address has been visited. You just don't have to record every address on the sheet. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is us doing the hybrid approach. So there's that same thing with the polygon. I don't know, is it a polygon when it's that wobbly? What with it? So that is the area that we suggested that we should mail shot. And you send that in with a risk assessment to APHA, and they will come back within 24 hours and let you know whether they agree to that mail shot. Next slide, please. One of the things you need to do early on is establish who your internal key players are. So I've listed some here. You'll need emergency planning. They're in charge of putting up the CMART meetings, the TCG meetings. They'll do any major incident standby declaration. They'll make sure the police and fire are kept informed of any restrictions in place at premises. One of our main roles, apart from surveillance, is actually comms. So you'll need to do member briefings, you'll need to do press releases, you need to do social media. Often just easiest to copy whatever APHA is doing, but your members, especially members in wards affected by the outbreak, will want to be kept informed. The public health team we keep in close contact with. I must admit, one of the big things for us is one of our first outbreaks was during a COVID lockdown. So we had to take care of our staff in relation to COVID, as well as making sure that we fulfilled our responsibilities on the animal health. So we were provided with COVID tests so that we could do the lateral flow test before officers started joining together in teams. Public health also provided us with really useful things like tea and coffee and high vis and pens and masks, all that we needed just to carry out the function. The database manager, you're going to do a mail shot. You're going to need somebody to pull all the addresses within your drawn polygon into a mail shot. I use the highways analyst because I can't draw those maps with the polygons on. I haven't got the ability, but I know somebody who has. You'll also want insight and intelligence because you should have an online survey, so you can put a QR code in your letter, put it in that links to a smart survey, and then they can return to you that way rather than having to ring you. You also need to inform your mail room because you're sending out thousands of letters, and street care in our case, just because wild bird collections, you'll get lots of people ringing in saying, I've got a dead bird here. We remove them from our public spaces, but that is coordinated by street care, who also will put up signs in many areas in relation to feeding wild birds. Next slide, please. So lessons learned from us. Know your internal key players, know what your strategy is, divide up the work. You can't do everything yourself. I go to meetings, I submit the hybrid approach requests, I submit completed tile forms, I act as a point of contact for any comms and guidance that's needed. I don't organise the operating base, I don't print out the forms, I don't distribute the forms to the volunteers, I don't do the foot patrols. There's only so many things that you can actually do, and it's better to divide it up and make sure everybody knows what they're doing, that rather than try to rely on yourself and Google. Make sure everybody knows they're valued. Make sure you thank everybody. They'll need to come back to you. You will need to use them again. We had outbreaks in quick succession. Don't treat them in a way that will make them not want to come back, and don't panic. If it's your first outbreak, don't panic. There's loads of us around the area who have dealt with one. We'll help. We will assist you if you need any help in any of these things, because the disease contingency plans are great, but we all review them, update them, file them, and when you take them out and you've got an outbreak, they don't tell you the practical steps you need to take. Next slide, please. Just a quick update. So the avian flu situation was debated in Parliament on the 30th of November, and they raised questions about delays in bringing in the measures such as the prevention zones, the lack of the coordinated response between England, Wales and Scotland, the lack of capacity at the APHA, which has also been highlighted in a recent report from the Public Accounts Committee, where DEFRA had said to have left the APHA to deteriorate to an alarming extent. They looked at the need for an accelerated vaccine development, which I understand there's work being done on in the background, but it's difficult. The virus mutates. Like with the COVID, will the vaccine work? You've also how you're delivering that vaccine. If you're doing it by injection, people have got to handle the birds, maybe once, maybe twice, and that increases the risk to humans who are handling. There's also the issue that we have with TB as well in cattle, is how do you differentiate from in a post-vaccination test? You can't tell the difference between a vaccinated animal and an infected animal because the same antibodies are showing up. They also mentioned the inadequacy of the compensation scheme for the industry. The industry is being decimated. I've already panic bought my turkey this year, but the compensation scheme used to run once the genotype had been isolated, so farmers weren't getting compensation and for anything but birds who were alive at 7 days after report. So obviously with high path disease, most of those birds could be dead by the time compensation was allowed. The compensation's now been brought forward, so I understand it's 48 hours rather than 7 days. Next slide, please. I think the lessons learned nationally is that a rapid response is essential. The biosecurity lapses need to be addressed. There weren't many spread of disease by people, but what they did find in some of the most recent outbreaks is that where industrial units have workers at several sites, there is a possibility that disease is being spread from one site to another by workers not cleansing and disinfecting on leaving one and before entering another. So that's all of the peripatetic workers. We certainly are. One of our first outbreaks was caused by a roof breach as well. That kind of biosecurity lapse at an industrial level needs to be addressed, because that's how the wild bird feces gets into a turkey shed, is by allowing the roof to be breached. And I think everything's been recognised that there's just a lack of capacity. Next slide, please. What are the solutions? Don't know. My guess, mandatory poultry register so that we know where all the birds are. Don't know. Will that stop us patrolling? Probably not, because there'll still be people who then don't make the mandatory poultry register rules. So you still have to find those chickens. We need better enforceability of the housing restrictions. It's really difficult when I'm not seizing somebody's chickens because they won't put them in a housing unit like they're supposed to. I think we need fixed penalty notices to be brought in, which are in the legislation but haven't been enacted. And I understand the consultation will start next year as to whether animal welfare fixed penalty notices are appropriate. We need more practical training. We need a whole day just on what a local authority does when they get notification of outbreak across all the teams. We need a full desktop exercise. And one of my personal bugbears, they've got a compensation scheme for the industry. There's no compensation scheme for local authorities. The big resource issue for us is the things we can't do. Avian flu outbreak, I can't do a routine farm inspection. I can't respond as well to other welfare concerns as I should be doing. And there's no funding. All those volunteers and the mail shots and all the work that's put into it, we get no money for. So I would shout for some better solution for the local authority work that's being done. And thank you very much.
Thanks, Nikki. That's incredibly helpful. I think what we can summarise, or what we can see really clearly from the last two presentations, is the huge amount of work and legwork that goes on, often at weekends, whether that's in establishing antiviral distribution, and thanks to Katie and Helen for their continued efforts on that locally, or in the response to the zones. It's just an incredible amount of work and can't be underestimated. And of course, other things won't necessarily hold off, because you've got an avian influenza. You may also be dealing with a flood or a pandemic, etc. at the same time. So it can't be underestimated. Just an observation from me as well regarding some of the practical things that Nikki touched on. I had the joy of volunteering to do some of the foot patrols, one that was in a very severe lockdown, so it was an excuse and a reason to get out of the house, which was very, very nice. Also, if you're quite nosy like I am, it's really nice wandering around villages and towns that you haven't been to and having a good look around. But the practical things around things like that operating base, it's the devil's in the detail. It is that tea, coffee, biscuits, and this time of year somewhere warm for volunteers, making sure that the volunteers are adequately shod and clothed, that they've got answers to questions that they might get asked by concerned residents, or where they can be signposted to. And it sounds really petty, but it's all the things that you will think about after the event when it's kind of too late. All that kit for volunteers about kind of pens and bibs and making sure they've got proper official ID so that they don't raise the concerns of residents, and something to record on your clipboard or something like that. It's all the devil in the detail. It's a lot of work. So I've captured as an action, Nikki, the feeling that we need some desktop exercises to test local authority resilience and processes. So we'll take that as an action. And another action as well from Allister regarding peripatetic workers often getting contacted by multiple HPTs, and a request, I think, for HPTs to try to coordinate better between outbreaks in different regions and zones. So we'll take that as an action for discussion with UKHSA colleagues. So again, we've got now time for, I think, unless someone tells me different, I think we now have got some time for Q&A. So for Nikki, or for Katie or Helen if she's still here, but also for UKHSA and Alistair still with us as well. So I'll take one from the chat, and I can see some hands going up, and so please do put your hand up if you've got a question, or add it into the chat. So I'll take one from the chat. Is there a need to develop a tactical plan to cover the issues Nikki has just mentioned? I mean, personally, I think that's a wise thing to do. Plans are always good. And as Nikki said, testing that plan as well. I don't know if you've got anything to comment on that one, Nikki.
Yeah, and I think one of the things I learned from starting to do this was how many other people were involved in it that I didn't know about, how many other people I could share the burden with. And I think we've all got plans, and we have animal disease contingency plans, and they're written out, and we've got field officer guides. I think when it comes down to it, they're written in a language that doesn't tell you what you have to do. Yeah, I've got to do surveillance, but nobody says, and you have to give out this form, and then you have to give out this form, and this is how you return the information, and this is what you do. I think there is that need for a practical thing, and I think there's probably a need to coordinate what the health people do with what we do, so that there's one overarching thing, not a piece of paper for animal health and a piece of paper for the health team and a piece of paper for that. It's that connecting the plans.
Thanks, Nikki. That's really helpful. So I'm going to go to some hands I can see up. So Jill, I think you were first. Jill Lamb, got a question?
Yeah, there's a couple really. It was for Nikki. That was really helpful to understand the LA role and what you're saying about all the operational detail that's not captured in plans necessarily. I was just wondering if there's an opportunity to do some kind of joint Merseyside, Cheshire type of workshop on this, just for the local authorities and the animal health staff involved, that we could sort of join together and maybe put something together as a sort of a learning workshop day or something like that. Paul Marley and I both sit on the Merseyside LRF, so we maybe through that sort of pathway we could team up with yourself and perhaps do something that would benefit everyone. Don't know.
I think it'd be really useful, and as I say, when I talk about these things, I talk about what we've done over the outbreaks, and we've learned for each successive outbreak. And I do think, but it isn't necessarily the best way. Somebody else might be doing it, but much better than me. But we all sit in our little isolated authority, and there could be things we could do much better, and we could learn from that. And I do think there's a real need for a day where we all learn together.
Yeah, I get from our animal health teams in the councils that they are really reduced now. So I think it's the experience really that counts. If somebody's had the experience and they can, relate that into it, it just brings a better plan for all of us really. So that if we can get your contact details, maybe we can sort something out. That'd be really good. But the other question was as well on the health side of things with the outbreak team. It was mentioned that they sort of finish in March 23. I just wasn't quite clear on how we can when you want support from everybody to recommission that team for April, how would that work? What needs to happen? I don't know. Is that for public health teams to sort of join together and commission that, or I don't know.
Thanks, Jill. I'll ask Helen to pick up on that specific point, because it sounds like you've already started those discussions, at least for our area. I don't know if it's going wider than that. Are you able to speak to that, Helen?
Yeah, so I'm looking at business case. Obviously, we don't know who we're presenting at yet. Hoping it's going to be a shared business case. I've already had an approach from other teams on this call saying that they'd be interested in speaking to us about it. So yes, we don't know what's happening with our team in April. They're in place at the moment. They may continue with some sort of COVID remit, so they may be there, but at the moment we don't know. So we're preparing. Well, in the new year we'll be preparing the business case. So anybody who wants to join with us in that, get in touch with myself and Katie.
Thank you, Helen. That's really helpful. And I can see Paul Marley, you've got a question.
Yeah, it's more than an observation, Donald. I have spoken to Nikki just in relation to the work that she does. That mitigation cannot be underestimated, because if you get that bit right, hopefully it prevents that spread and the potential transfer into the human population. So doing the work that Nikki does and having a greater understanding of that and funding that, etc., I think it would be a great way forward.
Thank you. Thanks for that observation. Anjila, you've got your hand up. Do you want to come back in?
Hi, thank you. Couple of things. So one of them, Katie, is the plan that you presented. First of all, congratulations, and it is such a relief to know that Cheshire has plans and there's not that mad scramble to try and find somebody, which you've always been extremely helpful for. But you did say something about AXA and funding, and I'm not sure Well, I don't think there's any funding from AXA. And I know you've also said you need to know clearly where the responsibility lies. And we have escalated that, especially with us being told that the stock of antivirals that AXA used to provide is no longer AXA stock, it's NHS stocks. And we have asked that, have you been communicating this with NHS? And I believe there are conversations happening nationally. So one hopes that something more definitive will be issued, like for seasonal antivirals to say this is the responsibility of the ICB, etc. So we're waiting on that. And I do realize the problems that causes. What was the other thing I wanted to say? Yes, the other thing was about Alistair's comment, but I can come back to that later, Donald.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Anjila. Just before I bring Terry in, we've got a question from Pippers. What do you do if there is a park/pond in one of the tiles? And I think the answer is that we don't do anything with that because it's not, unless they've got a petting zoo or something like that on the premises. It's about kept birds rather than wild birds. Have I answered that correctly, Nikki?
Yeah, one of the things we do that I didn't show in the slide. So when an officer goes out with the tile, they are asked to annotate it as well. So as well as filling in the spreadsheet, they'll be asked to. So as they walk along, and if you've got houses that you're knocking on one side and a field on the other, and there's animals on the field, so you would be asked to annotate the tile, saying like 2 horses, 6 sheep. A flock of geese. You are asked to incorporate that information. Realistically, you're just telling people. The only other thing is that with large areas of water, it may affect your risk assessment on the mail shot. So if you've got a very residential area surrounding a mere, that may lead APHA to say that you have to door knock, not to actually send out a mail shot because the higher risk in those areas.
Thanks, Nikki. That's really helpful. Terry?
Thanks, Donald. I just wanted to go back to the point, I read the funding that Nikki raised and that Anjila commented on, and to echo Anjala's observation about the position UKHSA may be in to support that. I think, though, there is an opportunity through the ICB, as Anjala's suggested, to make sure that we're clearly articulating what we think across our local authorities are the right things we should be doing and what kind of resource is going to be required to do that. And that's not specifically to avian flu, although clearly we'd want to do that, but it's more generally as we start to think about the priorities we've got as a system, the role that local authorities play in that, and therefore what's the right sort of enabling funding that's required. The planning process is now live for the ICB. We're going through that process as we speak, so the time is right to be able to clearly articulate what we think we need and to advocate for that. It doesn't mean we'll get it, but it's the right time to make the case. So I would suggest that perhaps as an action, if you're happy, Donald, as through Lucy Jane, if colleagues want to try and crystallise what kind of, what kind of support that means, so that on your behalf we can cohere that and make the case as part of the planning process. Thanks.
Thanks, Terry. I think that would be the right mechanism to do that through those health protection leads, etc. And we can include it in those plans, which we're trying to bring to bear with the ICB at present, aren't we? So that's really helpful. Just noted from the chat as well from Gary McCabe from the APHA saying very happy to help local authorities with any contingency planning work with local authorities and bring some of that expertise to bear. So I think if we try to get some of that going as we've described for the sub-region, and we'll use the kind of expertise of those areas that have had experience of managing it, and certainly that offer from Gary and APHA is incredibly welcome, and we'll take them up on that as well. I can't see any other hands up. Jill, you've still got your hand up. Is that a legacy hand?
It is, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, no problem. Have I missed any hands, Lucy, or any questions from the chat? So unless there are any further questions, we'll wrap up the Q&A session. I just want to take a moment to try and summarise any kind of actions and next steps that we've got. Has somebody been recording those, Lucy? Are you able to put them up on the screen, perhaps?
Yep, Laura's going to share those now for you.
That's great. Thanks, Laura. And then we can just check in with everybody that we haven't missed anything.
Okay, hopefully this will work. Okay, can you see that, Donald?
Yes, we can. Thank
Yes. Okay, that's what I've been making notes of. I don't know whether you want to add or amend anything at the moment, but
Let's have a look. Thank you, Laura. That's really helpful. So yes, we will share the recording and the slides of the event. We'll do a little edit of both and get them shared on the Champs website, and I'm sure we can send out a notification to attendees when that's available. We will maybe go through the questions again as well and share, we can pull those out as a written document as well. There was the action around looking at the pathways being included in on-call packs for NHS duty officers, but that was in relation to care home antiviral pathways. So that's something for a discussion outside of this meeting, but it's fine to record it here.
I think that was also an additional ask around the antivirals for avian flu to be in the on-call packs as well. But Helen, has that not already been actioned?
Yes.
I thought
we've already circulated that.
Yeah, it should already be in there.
Okay, that's great. And would that be on-call packs for across the sub-region?
No, that would be for Cheshire.
Okay, so there's something we can do to give a nudge across the other areas as well. There's something about investigating community swabbing mechanisms and facilities. So I think that goes back to Terry's point about how we articulate what it is that we might need for future contingency planning. And I think that's one of those elements there. And I think the item 5 is again what Terry's talking about how we can hopefully lever some of these requests in with ICB colleagues as well. I'm going to bring Anjila in because I think you've got your hand up, and I think it's the HPTs to look at ways of maintaining contact with farm owners and the peripatetic worker issue. Is that right, Anjila?
Yes, thank you, Donald. So Allister and everybody, we do that. We maintain that liaison with the farmer because they're often following up people who work on the farm. So we certainly do that. And then once cleaning and decontamination happens, I think the final certificate that everything is clean comes from APHA. And sometimes we need to chase up on that to make sure that, we've come to the end and we don't need to follow anybody else. So we do that already. And Allister, in your comments, you said about liaising with other HPTs. So once we get a list from you, we try and contact the people immediately because they've come on site somewhere in Cheshire and Merseyside, and try and follow them up and get them antivirals. Sometimes it so happens that by the time our antiviral provision is ready, they've already left and moved on. So in that case, we pass it on to wherever they've moved on. Sometimes we know they've moved somewhere, we try and pass it on to that HPT. Otherwise, we pass it on to the HPT where they normally live. Once we've started them on monitoring, I think that's a bit of a mixed approach, but generally we would tend to pass them back after we put them on our system, pass them back on the system to wherever they're going to be, because if they get symptoms, then that HPT needs to get them investigated using their own swabbing pathways and assessment pathways, etc. So we do liaise with them, with other HPTs even now. But I think what would happen is if they've done 10 days and they need to see whether they need more antivirals, they would have to contact them again just to check when the last exposure was and do they want antiviral. So you can't sometimes avoid that second call. You really need it. It's very unlikely that they'll know exactly when the exposure stops, so you can't get all the antivirals in one go. Sorry, I just wanted to explain that.
No, that's helpful. Thanks, Anjila. So I think the next 3 actions all really relate to this idea of us collaborating around contingency planning and helping areas to get contingency plans in place, particularly building on Nikki's point about those being joint plans, including health and the human elements and the animal health elements in one place. And then the next 2 around having some kind of joint workshop to develop those plans, but also some kind of follow-up process to test and get assurance on those plans as well. So we can follow that up. And then the last one is that we will circulate a feedback survey for this session as well, because it'd be great to hear what people think. So I think that brings us to the end of the session. I'd just like to give my heartfelt thanks to all of our speakers for providing such rich and in-depth and authoritative presentations. I think it's a fascinating area because there's so many moving parts, and the interaction between the animal and human species, etc., do make it a fascinating case study, and operational delivery being so complex, and I think we've seen that here today. And I'd like to thank all the attendees as well for taking the time to join us. It's been incredibly well supported. I think we've had about 100 people express an interest, and most of those turned up today looking at the numbers, so thank you all for that. And you'll be hearing from us again soon regarding the recordings and the slides. So unless I've missed anything, Jane or Lucy, we'll wrap it up and say thanks very much and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you.